Well, God bless you as we look into Luke's Gospel, and this time chapter 23. And we are in the midst of the trials that Jesus had to pass through. And these trials consisted of the first one to Ananias, the high priest, another to his son-in-law, who was also high priest, Caiaphas, and then to the Sanhedrin. But you see, these trials did not satisfy the Jews because they did not have the power of crucifixion. And that's what they wanted to do. They wanted to crucify Jesus. Only Pontius Pilate had that power. And so we're going to look now. Very early in the morning, they're taking him to Pontius Pilate. And they led him unto Pilate, and they started to accuse him of all false things and demand that Pilate would crucify Jesus. And amongst them, they were saying that he had called himself Christ a king. And now again, he must not deny that, because in actuality that was the reason he had come into the world, to eventually become the King of the Jews. But he had to give his life for his nation, for us all, before that could be accomplished. But nonetheless, that is God's purpose for him. He is to be the King of the Jews. And so, when Pilate asked him, "Art thou King of the Jews?" he answered him and said, "Thou sayest it." And Pilate said to the chief priests and to the people, I find no fault in this man. Now, something that Luke does not mention, but is mentioned in other Gospels, is that God warned the wife of Pilate that Pilate should have nothing to do with Christ, for Christ was the righteous man. In fact, tradition tells us that the night before the appearance of Jesus before Pilate, she had a dream. She was taken up into heaven, and she found in this wonderful place everybody was so mournful. And she said, "Well, why is everybody so sad?" And they said to her, "Look, your husband is going to command the crucifixion of the Son of God, the Lord of glory." Well, that had a tremendous impact upon her. And so, after that dream, she wrote a letter to her husband and said, "Have nothing to do with this righteous man." Pontius Pilate, we're told, trembled before Jesus. The wicked trembling before the righteous. And another thing that's very important to understand is this, that the track record of Pontius Pilate is not good at all. He was responsible for ordering the killing of many people. And so his track record is not good. And when your track record is not good, you don't have the strength to do that which is right. So anyway, Pontius Pilate pronounces him without fault. And then they say to Pontius Pilate, "Well, Jesus comes from Galilee." Well, when he heard that, and knowing that Herod the Tetrarch, or the king, was in Jerusalem, he thought he could be absolved from the decision making. And so he sent Jesus to Herod. Now, Herod was the one who had indeed executed John the Baptist. And he was very perplexed when he heard of Jesus doing all these wonderful works. And he said, well, John the Baptist must have been resurrected because I killed him. And Jesus must be the John the Baptist resurrected and therefore able to perform these miracles. And he desired with great desire to meet Jesus. Well, that had not been effectuated. But now here he was. He was in a position whereby Jesus would appear before him, and Herod was hoping to see miracles done by Jesus. Well, Jesus was not going to satisfy this wicked man whom he called a fox. And Herod had him brought in, questioned him, but Jesus would not answer him a word. He would not satisfy him. And so Herod, didn't know what to do. So with his other men of war, set Jesus at naught, mocked him, arrayed him in a gorgeous robe, and sent him again to Pilate. In other words, he was saying, well, you say that you're the king of the Jews. Well, we will bow down before you. But people hit him, smote him, and they mocked him and put this gorgeous robe on him. And then they took it off and sent him to Pilate. And, that act of Pilate sending Jesus to Herod, and Herod returning the favor by sending Jesus back, caused them to become friends again, because they had fallen out of the fact that Pilate had crucified 18 Galileans and mixed their blood with the offerings. And Herod was furious, who could do nothing against the legate of Rome. But now this event brought them together. And I had an experience once. I was a pastor and I had two of the elders who were not good men. And they had fallen out between them, and they didn't want to have anything to do with one another. They wouldn't speak to one another, and they were on the board. But they both ganged up against me. And when they did so, they became friends. So I know in a little way what this means. And, the Apostle Paul speaks of the fellowship of his sufferings. And as a Christian, throughout your life, you will experience certain things that Jesus experienced, so that you too may know the fellowship of his sufferings in some small way. Well, now, Pilate is calling together the chief priests and the rulers and the people, and said, "You have brought this man unto me as one that perverteth the people. Behold, I have examined him before you, having found no fault in this man touching those things whereof ye accuse him. No, nor yet Herod." And so he said, "I will chastise him." Well, that's something he should not have said, because if he finds Jesus without fault, he should not have chastised him. But he said, "I will chastise him, and I will release unto him Barabbas, who was a wicked man, a murderer, and held for sedition." And thinking, you see, that at this day it was the custom of the Roman governor to release one prisoner chosen by the people. And he thought, well, the people are obviously going to choose Jesus to be released. Comparing Jesus to Barabbas, there's no contest. Barabbas was a known murderer. And surely the people are going to say, release Jesus. and sentence Barabbas. But the people were so incensed and so filled with hatred against Jesus, stirred up by their chief priests and captains, that they said, "Oh, release Barabbas, crucify Jesus." Now, Pontius Pilate shouldn't have even said that. He shouldn't have allowed these things to be decided by the people. Because a leader must lead. A leader must be decisive. A leader must take control over events and guide the people. You know, I was struck by reading a book that has just been published, and it's about the Americans in London during World War II. And essentially, it talks of them before the entry of America into the war. Now, I'm not saying one thing or another here, but I'm just presenting the facts. One of the problems that the Americans had, and among them was Governor Averell Harriman and Gil Wynant, the American ambassador, and Edward Monroe, who was the American journalist of fame, sent to London by their newspapers. But anyway, here they were, and they were very, very sure, number one, that America was going to eventually come into the war. But they also saw the necessity of America coming in quickly to save Britain. And they all knew Franklin Roosevelt very well indeed, the president at that time. And they all came to Washington one way or another and presented the case for an early entry of America. And Franklin Roosevelt said that he was not going to do that. He was going to wait until an event occurred that the people would indeed want to go to war. And one of the comments that were made was this, that Roosevelt in actuality was no leader, because a leader should assess the situation, determine which is the right thing to do, then advocate that position, and use his personality to bring to pass that which was right. But Franklin Roosevelt wouldn't do that. Of course, Franklin Roosevelt's life was lamentable anyway, and probably he didn't have the backbone to do that. But that's just the same as Pontius Pilate. The Pontius Pilate, should have taken the leadership here and made a decision and said, look, this man is innocent, I'm freeing him. In fact, under Roman law, he should have done that. One thing the Romans were very particular about was Roman justice. And that when a situation came and somebody was accused, they claimed that never had an innocent man been put to death under Roman law. That was one of the things that Romans were very proud of, the fact that their law was adhered to in every situation by their governors that they appointed throughout the world that Rome governed. And here, the very acme, shall I say, of Roman judaism is failing here. Pontius Pilate should have freed Jesus, should have stood up and should have spoken to the multitude and should have persuaded the multitude to do the right thing. But he didn't. He lacked the courage that a leader must have. Well, the result was he gave in to them, and in verse 24, and Pilate gave sentence that it should be as they required. But the people were not the governors. They were not the judges. The judge should not have followed the people. The people should have followed the judge. And Pontius Pilate did not have the backbone to do that. And that's something that if we become into leadership, we must remember. We do not wait and see what the multitude want to do. We, on the other hand, make a decision that is right in the eyes of God. Well, so he is taken away to be crucified, and a great company of people and women which also bewailed and lamented him. So there was a mixture here. There were those who wanted his crucifixion, but there were others who lamented it. Well, Jesus turned to them, and remembering what we've said in previous chapters about the fact that it's a time of vengeance upon Jerusalem, and 4,000 were crucified at the fall of Jerusalem in AD 70 because they had crucified the Lord of glory. You know, Jesus said this, "Daughters of Jerusalem, weep not for me, but weep for yourselves and for your children." And so, some 40 years later, those children were, 4,000 of them were crucified. And then he's saying, and concerning the last days, he said, you know, they'll say, blessed are those who do not have children because of the judgments of the last days. Well, we move on. And then with him, there are two malefactors, two other criminals, and they come to a place called Calvary where they crucified him and the two malefactors. And we're told in other Gospels that in actuality what happened was that one was crucified on his right side, the other on his left side. And now we have some of the sayings of Jesus upon the cross. And the first one is, Lord or Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. They know not what they do. They did not understand. In fact, the Apostle Paul brings this out very clearly in Corinthians when he said, you know, if the princes had known that this was the Son of God, they would not have crucified him. And so Jesus is picking that up and saying, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they're doing. I know many people do not realize who Christ is, who Jesus Christ is, the Lord Jesus Christ, the Son of God. And therefore they do not treat him with the respect, nor his followers. But he is the Lord of glory. And then the people, you know, stood beholding him, and the rulers derided him and said, look, if he be the Christ, let him save himself. He saved others. And they mocked him. And they said, save yourself. But in verse 38, there is a superscription. Upon his head, just over his head, there had to be the reason why he was crucified. And the reason that Pilate said was, this is the King of the Jews. And the chief priests protested. They said, don't put that. Put, he said that he was the King of the Jews. And Pontius Pilate, to get back on them, having caused him to do something he didn't want to do, refuses and said, what I have written, because he knew that the reason they had crucified him was because of envy. The crowds were following him instead of them. And envy is a terrible thing. Jealousy is as cruel as the grave. And that was the reason that they were crucifying Jesus. Well, again, this time one of the malefactors, one of the criminals, says, look, you've saved others, now save us. And the other one, who had been also mocking Jesus, now is becoming penitent. He's becoming a penitent sinner. And he says to the other one, now let's be very careful. We are being crucified justly for what we have done. But this man has not done anything wrong. And yet he is suffering. And so he turns to Jesus and says, Lord, remember me when thou comest into thy kingdom. And Jesus replied, verily, verily, I say unto you, that today thou shalt be with me in paradise. What was he saying there? Well, the scriptures, both in the Psalms and in Ephesians, they make it very clear indeed that when Jesus died, his spirit went down into the earth. Now, what was in the earth at those days? Well, the part very near to the surface was called paradise. Paradise. And Peter tells us that he preached to those who were sometimes disobedient in the days of Noah. And what he was saying to the thief, you'll be with me in paradise. Do you remember when Saul met the winch and said, raise me up, Samuel? Samuel came up from paradise. He said, why have you disturbed me? I was at rest. All those in paradise were at rest, waiting for the Lord Jesus Christ to come and deliver them. And as it said in Ephesians and the Psalms, that he ascended with a very great company of saints. And this sinner was going to be one of them. And so that was a very joyous, shall I say, moment for him, that today, because very soon they were both going to die, Jesus from a broken heart, the others from broken legs. And it was about the 6th hour, and there was a darkness over all the earth until the 9th hour. 3 hours when the kingdom of darkness reigned in all its wickedness and cruelty. And you can imagine how all those demons came against Jesus during those 3 hours of darkness. And then the veil of the temple was rent. That's the price that was paid for the veil between the holy place and the Holy of Holies to be rent, and allow us, which the Old Testament saints could not enjoy, allow us to be able to enter from the holy place into the Holy of Holies, into the very presence and glory of God. Now that's the price that was paid. We're told the veil in Hebrews 10 is his flesh. And so that was the price that had to be paid to allow us to enter in to the presence of God. That veil was to be rent. And then the testimonies come. The centurion, here it's partial. The centurion, as he sees Jesus crying with a loud voice, Father, into thy hands I commend my spirit. He gave up the ghost. The centurion, who was the captain of the soldiers there, he says, certainly this was a righteous man. Other places it says, certainly, he said, certainly this was the Son of God. And then, the women wept because of the dying of Jesus. And then Joseph of Arimathea, who did not consent in the Sanhedrin council to causing Jesus to be killed, he goes to Pilate and asks for his body. And it was taken down, wrapped in linen, and they laid it in the sepulchre. And I have been in that sepulchre, as many of you perhaps have, and there on the shelf, the body of Jesus lay. But of course it lays no more, as we shall see in our next chapter. And the women saw it, then they went back. Because of the Sabbath day, they had to rest, they could do no more. But there he died triumphantly. And he had fulfilled all of God's will. May we do the same in our life. God bless you.